Hi, my name is Megan, and I'm a lecturer at Edinburgh Napier University, and I'm here to talk to you today about a paper I wrote called The Comprehensive Scenario Intervention Typology. So I first had the idea for this typology when I had basically some free time over the Christmas break. I was struggling a bit to work on the final edits of my thesis, and I did pretty much what every researcher does. I picked up another project instead of just finishing the project I was on. But really what I wanted to create was something that I could add to my website where I was putting all of my work at the time that could be sort of an interactive, user-friendly tool for professionals to show people in the field, to show executives, to show business professionals and things like that, what sort of give them a taster session of how you could develop a scenario planning workshop ahead of time. Specifically, I wanted to create a simple tool that could account for certain features or parameters of a workshop and reveal whether the anticipated elements for the workshop, like who will be involved and the scope of the project and everything, which features of those would complement and which ones would hinder the others. So I basically wanted to make a little heuristic for illustrative purposes. And it was obvious to me at the start that I wanted this online tool to take the form of a typology. So I got to building the platform. And then the more I started to build the platform, the more I realized I wanted to know more about the kinds of dimensions that could populate a scenario planning typology. So after about 2 weeks, I realized that if I was going to put this much work into the sort of self-serving platform that I wanted, I should go ahead and see if I could make it a paper. I already had a pretty full digital library of scenario planning scholarship. So then I just started scraping all of the databases, Scopus, Web of Science, everything I could digitally access at the time, and then just see what happens. Really, there was no call out for a typology at the time. In fact, there still isn't a big call for a typology. So I really was just sort of going at this as on my own, as my own project. And at this time, scenario planning, it's still cutting its teeth on building a solid theoretical base. So I thought this might make a helpful addition to the field's progress. One of the surprises for me, though, was that in researching this topic, I really expanded my knowledge of what a typology can be. And I just didn't realize at the time until I started down that, rabbit hole of research, how homogeneous my exemplars were regarding typologies. And I want to go ahead and pull up on the screen the beginning of the typology so you can see at least the first 2 sections of it. So what my research showed, though, was that everyone was basically talking about the same collection of dimensions. Everybody who had actually published a typology or something that could be considered a typology were pretty much talking about the same dimensions. If you thought about it as a Venn diagram, they all had some overlap. They were just using different language and applying the same dimensions maybe in different purposes, which was pretty exciting to see once I started looking at the data. And then one key dimension I realized was missing was what eventually became section 4 here. This was the scenario impact. People talk about the issues of scenario work not being implemented, the lack of understanding the outcomes of the work. And I noticed that these typologies, I think only one typology really actually focused any part of their narrative on outcomes. So I decided that's what's missing from typology. That's what I'm going to add, not just create this comprehensive sort of library, if you will, that brought all the existing typologies together, but also expand it into the dimension that everybody says is already missing anyway. So what was really funny to me at the time was in order to work through the data, I started realizing I needed a tool that could help me build my tool, because my room, after a while, my workspace just looked, I thought it looked more like the Minority Report. I had, you know, dimensions linking over here and concepts linking over there across about 30 years of typological work research. But in the end, it looked more like Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And it felt more like that too, because again, nobody was really asking for this work. I was just making it because I wanted to make it. And I felt there was this gap in the scenario planning scholarship. So when I submitted, I knew that the work wasn't complete, and that's often the case when you submit your manuscripts. But I didn't know where it wasn't complete. I had just basically hit my limit. So I submitted the manuscript in the hopes that the reviewers would help progress me that final leg, one way or another. Because, like I said, I didn't know where I wasn't seeing things. So the thing is, there really wasn't, again, any call for this. So I wasn't even sure if they were going to be interested in accepting an article like this. And thankfully, though, I was right on both counts. They sent it back. I mean, obviously it's published, so it's ultimately accepted, but the reviewers were extremely thorough and helpful, which in my opinion is exactly what the review process should look like. And the reviewers really are what turned my little hobby article into a proper piece of academic scholarship. I was about, I'd say 80% of the way there when I first submitted. I just needed a few more eyes on the map, if you will. You know, a heterogeneous group of thinkers is always, I think, going to be, and I don't think the data show, more advance the narrative quicker than a homogeneous group of thinkers or somebody by themselves, as the case was. So now the thing with typologies here is that they're never complete. And my hope with adding this typology to the larger scenario planning dialogue is to not only offer a new supportive tool, but to facilitate, I really wanted to facilitate new discussions around scenario planning. I had hoped and really anticipated people challenging my typology, you know, which dimensions need to be included that aren't, which dimensions need to rethink on their identities. See, what I tried to do, a big aim of mine was to preserve the language as much as possible. It's really exciting to make new words that then get adopted in your field. And I mean, that's just one of those sexy sides of science and business and research. But in a typology, I really wanted, as much as I was Venn diagramming basically all of the existing typologies, I wanted to do the same with the language. I really wanted to create a continuity from the past into the present that could make it easier as we moved into the future with this knowledge. So as I was putting this out as both a useful tool as well as something to be challenged and evolved, it turns out that I've seen budding outcomes to both of those hopes. So I've been contacted by one doctoral candidate in Australia who's using my typology as part of her research foundation. So that's fantastic, because that's where I was trying to use it originally. And that just helps show that there was some sort of logic or, you know, the opening stages to validity to the very ideas I had at the start while I was sitting there after Christmas, just trying to figure out what to do. And most recently, my former supervisor and I used a typology to develop profiles for all of the COVID-19 scenarios. So we picked only certain dimensions and went through them and said, okay, we're going to only use, say, I think we picked 3 dimensions from each of the 4 sections, then profiled from there down to their categories and subcategories. And we found in that work very quickly that some of the necessary dimensions to this typology for scenario planning work are missing, and not many. I think we found like 2 or 3, and I have to say it was pretty exciting. It's like, oh great, the practical application is already giving some very tangible feedback. And then some existing dimensions needed possibly new identities to better reflect their meanings. So for example, in the process design, there are practitioners. And we have several categories of practitioners, and then several subcategories of practitioners within. And this is one of those dimensions for practitioners where you can have all of the subcategories within a single scenario team. They are not mutually exclusive categories. And what we found was that we needed more than just the umbrella term experts or the umbrella term employees. We needed what we ended up developing and calling arm's length professionals. So these were external consultants who were creating these scenarios for organizations they were not personally connected with or involved with, or for fields. So a more global general perspective, but they were creating that arm's length in that they don't have any personal investment in the scenario work that will be coming after the fact. So that was really exciting. So we might be making a new paper with that. And so to kind of sum up the purpose behind all this is that science and knowledge progress in this organic fashion, and so does business and economics and commerce and society and all the rest. So it's my expectation that this typology will experience additions and alterations as time goes on. And honestly, that's the biggest compliment I think a scientist can receive, is that people are investigating or investing in their contribution and advancing it, investigating it and advancing it farther than the original person or scientist ever could have on their own. So you're welcome to the typology. I hope it helps you out, and thanks for listening.
Super duper. I'm still recording because I do have a question for you, Megan.
Okay.
You mentioned the outcomes as being something that you really think has delivered a solid contribution. Could you perhaps go through some of those outcomes and how you see them through the lens of your typology with us?
Sure. So something we had mentioned before. Would you like me to share my screen? Yeah, in fact, yeah, I'm going to share it because I want to show it. So something we had mentioned before, and when I talked about creating this sort of interactive typology checklist on my own website, just as a tool to show people to say, hey, if you can anticipate these certain dimensions, then I can help show you whether some of these dimensions actually clash with each other or will bolster or support each other. Well, if we go back to the very first dimension that's mentioned on the typology, not that there is a sort of order that these must be taken in, but it's the epistemological characteristic here. We have Cartesian and non-Cartesian, and what that means is the work that's going into this. Does the organization see themselves as an active player in the scenario, in the futures that they will be, pretty much constructing through a scenario planning intervention? Or do they see themselves as more arm's length, a set offset, and they're just almost playing what if scenarios, like wargaming, if you will, but not active players? They're looking at movements and progress that is independent of their own organization. So that feeds straight into the first characteristic of organizational capacity of the final selection that I started to, or I'm sorry, that's the second characteristic that I started to add to the larger typology dialogue, which is you've got collaboration and engagement. Will you be engaging with, as an organization, with the outcomes that you have envisioned? These scenarios are not predictions of the future. They're just plausible, various visions of the future to help you sort of roadmap your way and create, warning signs and all these other things for strategy. I won't go into that, but do you see your organization engaging in the work, or will you be an organization that ends up abandoning the work, or will you be selectively adopting how the work, how the strategy, how whatever your scope is at the end, how you will be implementing it, engaging it. So selective adoption is partial engagement, partial abandonment. And actually that happens a lot. And that's not, the word abandonment has such a negative connotation, but you know, sometimes you find that, which is why we do scenario planning, that what you thought where you should go or where you wanted to go is not where you end up needing to go because other realities have been exposed. So some of the dimensions are anticipatory, some of them are backwards checking. And so in the whole thing, you can create an anticipatory roadmap, but almost the scenario impact ends up being this backwards looking dimension. Did we collaborate? Did we engage? Did we abandon? Did we selectively adopt? You know, and if you can anticipate these things, then you can understand how these earlier dimensions that you're thinking about, you know, are we going to take an active stance, or are we going to, or do we see ourselves as non-players in the situation? How you can see how they start creating friction points or supportive points. So that was the big deal with adding this final one, was to give more a richer context to the forward-looking eye, which is what you do when you have planned strategy sessions, as well as the checks and balances in a backwards facing effort.
Super. Thank you so much, Megan.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate your time here for being with us today.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me. This was a lot of fun.